Seems like a good time for a video. While I'm driving, I'm gonna drive out somewhere, none of your business. Stop asking. Yeah, I think you probably are gonna need some diagrams for this, and so I don't know if it's worth making just a regular old video. Probably not. I mean, for your sake, but I'll enjoy it. I love thinking through this stuff after all. Okay, well, the George Zimmerman case, I mean, I think one of the most valuable things for people that they won't take from it, but that they could take from it, is framing. Okay, yeah, I know you have no idea about framing. So the idea with framing, cognitive science, the work of George Lakoff, is that basically all thinking takes place with metaphors. And so kind of before you can think about something, you have to figure out a metaphor. And the metaphor is like, it's like a playing board with divots in it where certain pieces can set, right? So, for example, cops, a famous thing dealing with police officers, is to realize that they end up having a very sort of a general purpose and narrow kind of framing. So, for example, with cops, when you deal with the cop on the street, that cop is trying to figure out if you are a perpetrator, a criminal, a bystander / witness, potential witness, or a victim. And you might even be more than one role, and various things, weird things can happen. People are sophisticated, right? So that you don't necessarily, a guy that is looking to categorize you is not necessarily going to totally pigeonhole you. He knows he's thought people were perpetrators and they turn out to be victims, and then he knows that. But this kind of approach, insofar as it's true, it's just a simplification. I mean, a lot of cops are probably a lot more sophisticated, but they'll tell you have to categorize people quickly into these major categories. And what that involves is the cop having a framework, in which there are certain roles, and people get put in those roles. And they get put in really quickly, too. Right? They get put in on a little tiny evidence. Now, you have an open-minded person. As they get more evidence, if the evidence of someone means they don't fit that particular slot they were put in, well, then the cop or the person will go ahead and modify that and move the person to a different role. A big problem happens when there is no other role. All right? So, often in a conflict, ironically, the more deadly the conflict, probably the stronger there is this tendency. You're going to have a good guy, bad guy role. People can't, that have George Zimmerman in the good guy role, have no other place to put Trayvon but the bad guy. There is no general abstraction. See, to me, the truth of framing, the interesting thing is that you can't escape it. All you can do is have better frames and maybe be more flexible about reapplying them. So, for example, I would apply every frame that I could. I've applied the Trayvon was a thug type frame. I've applied the George Zimmerman was a racist frame. Neither one of those really fit. And in general, you have an investigative frame where, I don't know, there were people, they did things. They're culpable for some things, they're not culpable for others. But you can see the evidence of framing. Now, one of the most interesting things that Lakoff says about framing is basically people adopt a frame and put and the people and the entities in the real world get assigned positions in this framework. Not only can they tend to stick there, but there's a reason, which is that you can only absorb facts you're ready for, right? If there is a fact that is contrary to the very frame, like, let's say both people have some fault, or something that isn't as simple as, say, a good guy, bad guy frame, or that a perpetrator was a victim, or anything breaks this simplistic assumptions of the frame, most people, once they already have the frame, there's a tendency that they don't even receive that information. It bounces off, and you can see that. And I'm sure you pro-Zimmerman people can see that in us, in our side, our frames. You're telling us certain facts that are bouncing off. Sometimes they might even be real facts. I mean, sometimes I think they're just bogus, like the Trayvon Martin stuff, Twitter stuff. But you can probably see that facts are bouncing off us too. You know, and this bouncing is like, sometimes it's like literally somebody's told something and it doesn't seem like they hear, but that's not the bouncing. The bouncing thing is in this public dialogue. You can actually talk to the person, have the person acknowledge the fact, and the next thing you know, they're giving a comment somewhere else, ignoring the fact. And it's like, what, huh? Didn't we have an agreement? Well, that's because a person's framework is like a multi-dimensional lathe, and it wears down the facts into its shape. Now, in the old days, we'd say, yeah, think of it literally. Look at the evidence, man, just the facts. That's also a framing. It's a much better framing. But in the end, you have problems like we might not know all the facts, and we're making decisions on this, that, and the other. You might not have an expert frame. You might not be a police detective and have access to an expert frame that allows you to collect the information in a way that, say, would have you execute the judicial system's requirements in a particular situation. You might just not be capable of that. I might not be. So what do? Well, what we do is we remember we have framings, and we notice we should listen for the sound of facts bumping off of our frames. And we should go, geez, I need a bucket to collect those facts, or another frame, or a frame where maybe I'm wrong that could collect those facts. And if they build up, then I'll know I really am wrong, because I'll have a stronger framework that fits, that's more apt. But I mean, you have people here that are willing to go to any level. You know, like the Martins are a thug crime family, when really they're obviously, you know, an upwardly mobile, middle-class African-American kind of family. I'm sorry you can't recognize it. That's what my looking at it seems like. But no matter what, you can't deny that they're looking for every little infraction or hint in Trayvon. But George could be high on Adderall and temazepam, kill a dude, and they're saying he's a hero and he's just really warm-hearted, and that's because that's their frame. When you see someone saying something about someone like George Zimmerman, or for that matter Trayvon Martin, or for that matter anyone, that seems totally counterfactual, or where is it coming from? Even if they have the facts to back it up, where it's coming from is their frame. They're describing the situation that their frame encapsulates. And that's what they're describing. They're describing their mental picture, which is a frame, which is not just a picture built up from evidence. It can't be, because you need one in order to collect evidence. The only way to do better, and you can see that Jay Flexen has done better, in spite of the frames he has just naturally as a human being, because of his criminal justice experience or education, he knows how to shed himself for reasons of reasoning, you know, for purposes of inference and analysis, and use a more general purpose frame that has to do with law and order and crime and justice, where you could put the facts in and you can know, hey, that's probable cause or not. You know, little technical things that allow you to analyze a situation with respect to the criminal justice system. Now, you won't find who deserves special over-the-board sympathy and things like this. You won't solve every human problem with a nice rational frame of a police detective. But you will find out who fired the gun and enough about it to probably get a hint on what should, you know, be the result according to the law of the land. It won't be the whole story. You'll go home to your family and you won't be able to use that detective frame. Now, the freedom from frames is to become the master of them, to create them, know when you are creating them, modify them, feel free to modify them. Stop using the frames that your dad got from your granddad, from his granddad, from 1,000 granddads, and start knowing what you're using to think all of your thoughts. Now, I can shed a frame that I've adopted and see again and try to use a different one or a new one or even a Daiwada Man one. And that's how I judge between these ideas. If I can adopt a frame where George Zimmerman was totally legit in everything he did, and I recognize it as the framing of an insane, schizophrenic, non-responsible man. And that's not good enough. That frame is not my criminal justice frame that I believe in, right? So I could tell that's not, if that's the frame I have to adopt to make him look right, I'm sorry, that's not how it works. Right. I gotta have my belt fixed.